Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have a story from one of our viewers who was solo camping in a very remote location in the White Mountains of Eastern California. And this story is very real, it's very legitimate, and it's very intense. That's next. Okay, so I am in the cabin tonight, and for our beer we have the Tahoe IPA India Pale Ale. Check that out. That is a local beer that is out of Truckee, California with the 50/50 Brewing Company. And we're gonna crack that. There it is. And the original Tahoe beer was first brewed in this area in the 1860s. Boy, you can see the IPA Pale right there. Check that out. Very good. We're going to give that a sample here. Oh, I've had this one before. Kind of a little bitter finish to it. Doesn't last very long. Tastes really good. Can taste the hops in it. And I do like that. It's a little bitter at the end though. I do not like that part of it. But yeah, 1860s, the original Tahoe beer. And this is a different company at this point, but still using the name Tahoe. So there you go. Cheers. This story came to me from one of our viewers named Mark, and he found on YouTube a story from a man named Marius who had this experience in this remote location in the White Mountains of Eastern California while solo camping, and he said, you got to check this out. And so I contacted Marius and asked him if I could retell his story. And Marius did a video, a 30-minute video about his encounter that he had. So I'm going to put that in the link in the description below so you can check that out. And it's a very real, authentic telling of this story. Very frightening, extremely frightening what happened to Marius. And he was really hesitant to even put this out there on his channel. He's got his channel called 4 Bandits, and that's where he put his video. And he said he was really hesitant. He was concerned about ridicule and criticism. There's a stigma with having these stories about encounters that you may have had with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, cryptids, and people don't always want to open themselves up to that. It's just like, why would I do that if people are just going to give me a hard time? And your brain goes, you know, I'm going to get 100 comments. They're all going to be negative. I'm a liar. I am faking. I'm looking for attention. You're making this up. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what people are going to say. But he felt that this was really important, that he had to do this because of what happened to him. Now, this story took place September of this year, mid-September of this year, 2024, so it's very recent. He had his encounter, and about a week later, he posted his video, later September. Now, Marius wanted to go on a vacation in fall, and he lives in Southern California, so he wanted to take the 395 up and go along the Eastern Sierra. 395 is a great route, and it comes up through Lone Pine, Bishop, Mammoth, Carson City, my area, and Reno, and he wanted to work his way up to Oregon, go to Crater Lake, Mount Hood, and he wanted to do some fly fishing. So he's going to have a really nice fall break, about a week-long trip. He's heading through the Eastern Sierra, going through Bishop, and he needed to spend the night somewhere, so he went off up into the White Mountains. Really tall mountains. They're east of the Sierra, and they get to about 13,000 feet. He was on this very remote road working his way back about 13 miles heading for the Bristol Cone Pine Forest. And there's a visitor center way up there in the Inyo National Forest. This visitor center, there's some trails up there, and they're displaying the Bristol Cone pine trees that are these amazing ancient trees that lived to between 4,000 and almost 5,000 years old. Considered the oldest living thing on Earth. And these trees only grow between 9,000 and about 11,000 feet in elevation. Very high elevation, very harsh conditions. So Marius is on this route, and he's working his way back up to this area called Keith's Point, and he wanted to camp alone. He wanted to solo camp. He wanted to just enjoy some time by himself and see the stars at night and just not be in a campground with everyone else. So he finds this very remote location, 5 miles off of this 13-mile road, and he sets up his camp. And he did not have a tent, and he did not want to camp in a tent. He took his Mazda CX-5 and he converted it to a little mini RV, and he had a tri-fold mattress that he could put in the back where he'd flat the seat, and he could lay that out and sleep inside his car. And he really liked that because he didn't want to have this big old camp, and he just liked this idea of just pulling in and just setting up a sleeping situation and making dinner. So he made dinner and got into his vehicle and had the sleeping bag and the pillow, and his feet were facing to the west, and the front of the vehicle was facing to the east, and he had a sunshade in the windshield. Back hatch is here, windshield's over here, and he had his flashlight and his cell phone were right next to him, and some of his gear was in the front seat, and he was really looking forward to his little trip. And did have the sunroof was open, the slit open, not the whole window, the glass was still there, and so he could see the stars. And he was really comfortable, and he fell asleep. About 2 a.m., he hears on the front of the vehicle, the front hood, which was facing east, he hears a bump. It wakes him up. And he sat up and he listened, and he didn't hear anything else. And he kind of thought, I swore I heard a bump. And he thought, well, maybe I'm just imagining it. So he lays back down and goes back to sleep. About 2 minutes later, he hears on the front hood again, another bump. And he was certain he heard something this time. He's thinking, I don't know, is that a pine cone that fell? I don't think so. I don't think I'm under any trees. So he gets this little flashlight. It's one of these kind of vertical flashlights, and he turns it on, and you have to cycle through low, medium, high, flashing, and off. You have to kind of cycle through to get what mode you want. And he reaches out through the front seats and then moves the sunshade back, and he shines it out onto the hood of the vehicle. He's looking around, doesn't see anything. It's a very dark night. There's no moon. And so he goes, okay, I don't know. There's nothing out there. So he lays back down again. Several minutes later, 4 or 5 minutes this time, he feels his vehicle go like this. It goes whoop, whoop, like something pushed down on it. Right away, he thought, oh my gosh, there's a bear outside. And he'd seen bears in Yosemite like get up on the sides of vehicles with their paws near the top and then like push down, and the vehicle would drop like that. He thought, there's got to be a bear outside. And he'd had experience with bears before. He had been camping in a campground. He was at a picnic table and a bear came right into his camp. He had to deter it, made some loud noises, scared the bear off. He was in his tent another time, and a bear came right up to his tent. He could hear it outside breathing and then like sniffing, and he had to scare that bear off. So he was not terrified, but he was concerned. Okay, it looks like I got a bear outside. He also had some protection. He had a knife and a handgun, and he thought, if this bear tries to get in, I got some options. I don't want to shoot the bear, I don't want to kill the bear, but at least I have some options. And he felt safe, at least he's inside of his vehicle. So Marius thought, okay, well, let's get the flashlight and let's shine it right in this bear's face and hopefully deter it. Maybe we'll blind it a little bit, at least let it know that I'm in here, and hopefully spook it away. So he turns on this flashlight and he turns over to the window, which is about this wide, and he shines it out the window, expecting to see a bear. What he saw changed his world.
I took this flashlight and I thought maybe I'll scare the bear with the light. You know, you can scare bears with a light or noise and things like that. So I put this light on full beam and turned it on, basically, shining it out the window, directly out the window like this, and basically with the intention of blinding the animal, whatever was out there, putting it into his face and just scaring it away, hopefully, without any further incident. And well, okay, so what I saw wasn't a bear. What I saw was my whole entire window, the entire section of the window, which is probably about 2 feet wide, I guess. The entire section of the window was filled with gray fur, gray and white mixed together, but gray fur. The hairs were long like that, but was the terrifying part, and I don't know if I want to say terrifying, but I guess it kind of was that there was a hand. Imagine my hand being furry, completely covered in fur here, but about maybe 3 times the size of my hand. And I don't have a small hand. I don't know if you see next to my hand, my head. I don't have a small hand, but imagine it being about 3 times this size, like that, hanging down in front of the fur. So the fur is back here, and then this hand is kind of just like this in front of the window, and distinctly seeing fingers, not claws, fingers covered in fur. Like I said, about 3 times the size of my hand. And I put the light on that, and then as soon as I saw that, instantly I shut it back off. To say that it was a scary moment is to minimize the whole thing. It was more than scary at that moment. The image that I was seeing, the processing of the image that I was seeing slowly started to creep in.
And right away, his brain started to shut down. He wasn't quite sure what he was looking at, and it was not a bear. And so he immediately tries to turn the flashlight off, and he has to cycle through, click, 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 several times to get to the off state, because he didn't want to reveal himself or piss this thing off or whatever this was. And he finally gets to the off state, and he just lays back down, and he's in this not fight, not flight, but this freeze state. His brain just was not operating, and he wanted to make himself as small as possible. This was not a moment, a dirty Harry, I'm going to grab my handgun, go outside and deal with the situation. This was terror beyond belief that he'd ever experienced. And he said to say this was a scary moment does not do this justice at all. He felt this deep state of not just fear, but this aloneness. And he was realizing, it took him some time to process this over the next few minutes, that there's this very large creature that should not exist that's standing just outside of his vehicle. And he was miles from any help, no cell phone reception, by himself in the middle of the night in his vehicle. And this realization how big this thing was starting to kick in. And he realized this big hand that was hanging there outside of his window, just not even a foot and a half away from his face, was huge. This thing was huge. And he said he's 6'1", and when he stands up next to his vehicle, his head is just above the top of the car, and his shoulders are like even with the car. So his hand would hang down about even with the door handle, well below the window. And he's laying there just trying to understand what's going on, and this was so terrifying. And then he looks up at his sunroof, which was open, not open to the air, but is slid open so he could see out the glass. And he thought, oh my gosh, this thing most likely it's so big, it was looking down at him through the sunroof.
The next thought that creeped into my head was the fact that let me get oriented here, to my back, right over here, just behind me right here, I have a sunroof on the car. And the shade from the sunroof was pulled back so that I could look at the stars when I was trying to get some sleep. And it dawned on me at that moment that whatever this creature was over here was standing over the vehicle and looking at everything that I was doing from above me through the sunroof. And when that dawned on me, I immediately had this kind of a reaction where I went like this. Like I lowered my head a little bit, because the thought of whatever was outside there was looking at me right through above this portion right here, right behind me. That was terrifying. That was a kind of a scary thought. And I'm 6'1", I'm 260 pounds, man. I'm not light and I'm not short. I'm a pretty big guy. And I can take care of myself in most situations. I don't fear men. I don't want to say I don't fear animals, but I don't fear that many animals. So I don't scare easily, in other words. And this particular moment in time, I can easily say, was probably the scariest, most terrifying moment of my adult life, I want to say. Mostly because I was alone. I was far away from civilization. Like I said, I had driven 13 miles up from Big Pine and another about 5 miles in from there to the turnoff of the road, and then another maybe 3-4 miles maybe in from the main road into this dirt road into the wilderness, past Keith's Point. So I wasn't anywhere near like civilized man. I wasn't anywhere near help. There were no people around. There was nothing, just me and this creature. And this creature that could absolutely get into that car if he wanted to. Absolutely. He could have easily smashed that window in and smashed the top of the car in or whatever, the sunroof in, probably taking me by the top of the head and just yank me out of there. It was literally that enormous, that big of a creature. And that thought was incredibly terrifying. I keep using that word, but that's pretty much what it was. It was in the pit of your stomach. You feel that, where you think that at any moment glass is going to smash and crash in upon you, and you're going to die.
He didn't know for sure, but that thing was right there. It was so big it had to be looking down right at him. And it just made him want to just be as small as possible and not move and hardly breathe, just hold his breath. He lay there for several minutes, just waiting, listening, and at some point, the window to his left, he could now see out the window. It's very dark, mind you, but he could see like the dark blue sky and the silhouette of the trees on the horizon out the window. So this thing had left. At least he thought it had.
And I have no idea how long I stayed like that and how long this incident occurred, how long it took place. My mind just wasn't functioning. It stopped functioning. I don't know if how many of you have been in that kind of a situation. I've been in situations that I thought were dangerous before, and I realized that they were not as dangerous as what I felt that night. And like I said, the animal, the creature, just moved away. Eventually moved away, and I noticed that it moved away because the reflections from trees and background, sky in the distance and all that returned to the window. It was no longer blocked by that big, giant, enormous body that stood out there before. It was gone, and that light, whatever light was available from the sky, returned to that window. And I did turn and looked, and there was nothing there anymore.
Took his flashlight and he shined it out the windows, just trying to make sure where this thing was, and hopefully it was gone. And after a few minutes, this kind of normalcy started to come back to him, and this terror, this moment of terror and life or death started to leave him, and his mind started to function, and he immediately went and got his handgun, made sure it was locked and it was loaded, and now he was very vigilant and on alert, making sure this thing didn't come back. And he spent the rest of the night sitting up, watching and waiting and making sure that nothing came back to his vehicle. The next morning, he's exhausted. He gets up, opens up the door, steps out, and he starts walking around the vehicle looking for any evidence, any tracks. And the ground was very hard packed dirt. There had been no rain, and there was no way for an impression to be left. He did see some disturbed dirt by his window, kind of like scratch marks, but nothing he could take a picture of and go, here's a definitive footprint. No footprints, but something was there. You could see evidence of that, but it just not even worth a picture. Looks around, sun's up. It's just kind of a weird feeling. It's like everything's like normal. You know, the birds are up, the sun's up, everything's normal again, and yet he just went through this really strange, frightening experience. He packs everything up. He knew his trip was over. He was not going to go to Oregon. And he said he did not want to go back home with his tail in between his legs. And so he went down the mountain several miles away from this location to a campground where there were the other people and RVs. And so he wanted to spend one more night camping before he hit the road heading back to Southern California. So he's got people camping on his right side, on his left side. He feels really comfortable. And he goes in his vehicle, and nothing happened, but he was watching a movie before he went to bed, and it was actually The Gods Must Be Crazy from the 1980s, a really funny movie. And he fell asleep, and he woke up the next day, and he left the lights on in the front of the vehicle, and his car wouldn't start. And so he thought, oh my gosh. And he thought about it, and he thought, what if I had been previous location the night before and my battery had died? I'd have to like walk several miles to get help, and I'd be, a vehicle that wouldn't start with this creature next to me. And he just thought, you know what, this trip is, I need to go home. I am done. Something is telling me, God is telling me I need to be done with this trip. And so he got some help, some people within the campground had some jumper cables. They jumped his vehicle, and he was really grateful, and he went back home, Southern California. Just glad to come home and be done. He said he no longer will ever camp alone, solo camp. Just won't do it. It's just what he went through. He just can't afford to do that again. He also said that because of this experience, he was previously a non-believer. There is no such thing as a Bigfoot. It is a myth. It is a legend. It does not exist. He is a believer. Knows that this experience happened to him kind of almost for a reason, that he was supposed to tell people about what happened. And then he still wants to do things in the outdoors and go camping, but he wants to be with people, and he wants to go fishing, but he doesn't do all these things alone anymore. And I understand. I don't blame him. So I really appreciate Marius for letting me share his story. And again, if you guys want to hear his full version of it, click below. I'll have that link waiting for you down there. And so I'm really grateful for him and people like that are willing to share their stories. And that's what I do here on this channel, is I share other people's stories about what they've went through. And it's not always about evidence that I can collect to prove that you're wrong. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm not here to prove you're wrong. And I come here with pictures, and I got footprints, and I want to tell you that I'm right and you're wrong. And there's too much of that going on in this world that it's not what I'm about. So if you guys can handle that, if you guys like these stories of other people's encounters, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. That really helps me out. All right, you guys. Thanks again. Appreciate all the comments. And we'll see you on the next one. As always, keep hiking.